You ever watch The Big Lebowski when Walter Sobchak is losing it in a bowling alley? He pulls out a gun and he's like, "Am I the only one who follows the rules anymore?" Well, you're in luck because I feel that way a lot of the time. And maybe Danny does too. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Yeah, today we're going to talk about, do rules even matter? I feel this way all the freaking time. I'm like, why do I even bother following rules anymore? Nobody else does.
It doesn't seem like they do, does it? It's like it
Mm.
seems like no one does. Like even like driving conventions, like everything just seems to be tossed out the window. Like it's very weird. And it's so I was thinking about when you mentioned this, like in my head, I was running through ideas and like it's funny because from a philosophical standpoint, I would argue they really don't up to a large point. But then from a social, like, and I think this would be philosophical too, but social, like anthropological standpoint, like the whole sense of community is a foundation of essentially rules, conventions, norms, and etiquette. So like, in a certain, and I think this is why there is, because I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and I think this is why there is such a lack of community anymore in our country, especially in the US, and I'm sure this is probably true elsewhere because people don't live near their families. They tend to live, in isolation. There's a lot of different people with a lot of different values in the same area. So it's not like, it's not like you have like a central, not that I'm even religious, but like a church or something that's a central organization. So you have a bunch of like competing norms, etiquettes, conventions, ideas, and none of them really like necessarily overlap that forms that community or that core values of that community. And I think it is interesting because I think that is very much lacking anymore. Like that sense of like, this is where I live and I belong here and these other people are sort of like me.
Yeah, yeah. This stuff, like I just watched Big Lebowski again for the first time in
It's a great
probably
movie.
5 or 10 years. Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing movie. And when that scene happened, I was just like, oh my God, that is me. Like I literally, I literally lose it on a regular basis because I'm like, does nobody freaking care? Like be in the locker room changing and there's signs all over that say like, do not use cameras in here. And there'll just be people like using their cameras, their phones, taking pictures and shit, like right next to the fucking the
Yeah.
sign. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, what is going on with this
Yeah.
world?
I don't know. It is weird though. People just don't seem to care anymore about it. Like it's just like everybody's in their own little world and like there's no and it's funny
Well,
because
I
like,
mean, you look at you, dude, you look at our presidential candidate, like
oh
one of them
God.
is about to go to jail. And it's like, how could the leader of the free world be about to go to prison? Like that just
Yeah.
goes to show that like rules just don't matter. You just
Not to mention that they're
doesn't
beating their
matter.
own record for the oldest election ever. You know what I mean? Like it's oh God, it's
Jesus.
ridiculous. It's a mess. Anyway, but yeah, yeah, and it's funny because like part of me, it's really is funny because I find myself torn with this because like part of me from my like existentialist authenticity side says like re kind of rejects them because I feel like just conforming to rules is dangerous because you get into conformity, you lose yourself. So you need to find yourself, but you have to have your own reasons. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you would come up with it. And I think this is where people get confused. It doesn't mean you necessarily come up with completely different actions. It's just your reasons for those actions would be your own. Does that make sense? Like I'm still
Mm.
not, I still think killing people is wrong. Now, why I think that might be different from you, I might have my own reason. That's fine, right? And I think, but we somehow like lost that connection and shared humanity, maybe. And maybe it is because we also like I feel like anymore with especially with social media, internet, the exchange of information, like we've actually like instead of becoming more open-minded and more open to others, more understanding, we become more actually isolated and closed, I think,
Oh,
and
totally.
more, and there people are so want to put people into groups and into camps and say like, like Democrats and Republicans or this, old people, young people, whatever, like, and make them adversaries. Right. And I think that's a huge part of what this is because it's like, well, screw everybody else. I'm just doing what I want to do.
Well, dude, the competition is on a global scale now. Like I just started watching Stranger Things again, and the girls in there are arguably like not spectacularly attractive. It's supposed to be like the 80s, you know? And it reminded me of like, back then before social media, you literally like the most attractive girl in your town probably wasn't that attractive. Like I know in my town, kind of mediocre, like nothing that you see nowadays on social media. And
Yeah, well,
so,
because
yeah,
what you see on social media a lot of times too is people that have trainers and they have plastic surgery and they have, I mean,
hmm
like they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on like, somebody creating a diet plan and stuff and like, all this stuff to make them look their and then they're editing pictures on top
yeah,
of that. It's like, yeah, it is like I think we have these unrealistic ideals. It is true too, actually. Now you mentioned that, I'm just thinking. I remember even like, you remember like what was it called? The Sports Illustrated. Remember when the swimsuit issues like even
hmm
those women weren't like comparatively to now, they looked more like I mean they were very pretty, but they looked more like everyday people, I guess, if
yeah.
that makes sense.
hmm
Not like these like unattainable ideal type things that like
Isn't
you
that
see now.
interesting that the Sports Illustrateds from back then look like everyday people, but like back then, those were like the
Yeah, well that's
pinnacle
just
of
it.
like,
Yeah, that's
oh,
what's funny. Yeah, like
I know.
they
You look at like Eddie Van Halen videos, and there's these like Thon girls that are just thin, and it's just like, that's it.
yeah. Because I think but that's the interesting thing. Like we're so used to nowadays, like, I mean, it's just like when you go back and watch an old movie that like when you were younger were blown away by like the special effects. And now you
Mm.
see it and you're like, oh my God, like it's almost like laughable how bad it is. But
Yeah.
it's like I think that's part of it. It's like, technology's changed. We have 4K cameras now. It's so easy to manipulate the image and make it exactly appear as you want. It's so easy to modify. I mean, I remember there was a report. It was like these companies like that sell clothes and stuff with their catalogs, they were getting in trouble because they were airbrushing like crazy. Like, I mean, these models that were already very beautiful, they were taking and then reducing their waist like five more sizes, and like making it all out of proportion. And it's
Uh-huh.
like, that doesn't exist in reality. And I think we get this kind of like, yeah, it's weird. And I think all that feeds into this though, right? Because we keep making more and more classifications, separations, putting people against other people. And it's like, I feel like in some sense, it's like almost like as much as like the internet can connect us, it's made us like much more alone and much
Mm.
more isolated than we ever were. And it makes people think they have enemies everywhere and there's other people to blame for everything. And so that attitude of like, who gives a F just carries over into every action, right?
hmm
Yeah, I don't
So,
know.
what do you think? Is it worthwhile following rules?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Like, I think to a degree, I don't know. I think to a degree, I think being an example is good, and I think it is important. Like at the end of the day, we're communal animals, right? And our community is founded on those conventions, on shared ideas, shared values. But I think our problem is we're finding community not in our actual factual physical community, but like in virtual community, instead of actually in the real world. So our real world community is getting degraded more and more over time because no one's seeing that as sort of a median for those shared values, interests, and things like that. So I think to a degree, I think I think like, look, just to give like, I mean, I don't think you should follow rules to the point of just conforming for the sake of conforming. I think that's dangerous. But I think like I live in a town. I want my town to be clean, so I don't throw trash on the ground. I pick up after my dog. Just simple stuff like that. I think is an example to everyone else that I do live here and I appreciate and value the place, right? That's all it's saying.
Something, how we talk about how like when other people make do something, we think it's a character flaw, but when we do stuff, we
Oh yeah,
think it's
totally.
like we have a reason for it. I
Lots
sometimes
of
wonder
reasons.
that, like when people do stuff, like I see people throw trash on the street all the time, and I'm
Makes me
just
so
like,
mad, dude. I
I
know.
just wonder, I'm like, are they just having like a really bad day, or is this just a habitual thing for them?
It's hard and it's hard to get in I know, and like you want to like empathize, understand, but it's really hard to get in the mindset of why. Because I can't imagine like I also have a hard time imagining when I would do that. Now, if it like here's the thing.
Like let's say okay, they just lost their job because when it rains it pours. Like when bad stuff
Yeah,
happens, it just
of
all
course.
goes south. They just lose their job. Their girlfriend leaves them. They went to like their favorite restaurant and it just closed before they got there, and they're just freaking pissed and they're leaving and they have this I don't know, a receipt, plastic bags, like wrapper from something, and they're just so pissed off, and they're just like, "Oh, forget it, you
I could
know?
see that. Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah,
I could see
that could
that.
happen.
I mean, because there's also the distinction too. I think like, I see if I see young kids do it, I'm tend to be more forgiving because I figure like, there's lots of, they could be doing it for any number of reasons. But like adults I have a harder time with. I do. It's hard to like justify because it's like you live here too, though. It's like I don't know. It's weird.
I think people don't get that like what that they're creating their world. Like I know we had this
Yeah.
conversation when I stopped being friends with that dude who started doing criminal stuff. And
Yeah.
I was trying to reason with him. I was like, dude, if you continue doing this, like I asked him, I was like, would you want this to happen to your family? He's like, no, I would never let that happen to them. And I'm like, well, the only way that this is going to happen to them guaranteed is if you do it. Like,
Yeah.
because if
Because you're
you do it, that means other
perpetuating it.
people. Yeah,
Yeah, you're
exactly. And
perpetuating
he's
a
like, that just
cycle.
doesn't make any sense. And but it's just like, I don't know.
But that's like reasoning by convenience, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
make sense to him
It'll
now
never
because
happen to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like I think that's a big part of it though. We all believe that. Like everybody functions on this belief that like you're different. It's not gonna happen to you.
I know.
It's gonna
I was
be.
like, uh,
And I think
I
that
actually laugh because the exam I have coming up, how like I knew going into this that like it takes many people multiple times to pass it, but like the deadline's coming up. I got to take it in 2 weeks, and I'm definitely not prepared enough. And so we were talking about it the other day. You were saying something along the lines of like, yeah, we all know that it's going to happen to somebody, but we never think it's going to happen to us,
yeah,
And I was like, I was laughing because I still thought that like I would be the person who would just pass
yeah,
it the first time.
of course. But it's
Uh,
funny because like we can, and I think part of that though, like I mean, in that case, look at the exam. I think part of that is like it's like that false optimism that enables you to stay motivated, you know? And I do this all the time and I know I do it. Like I know a lot of things I'm optimistic about, I know probably aren't actually going to come about. But it's like if I'm not optimistic about it, my motivation will just be destroyed and I won't do it. So the only functional way for me to operate is to just be optimistic and act like it's going to be different for
have
me.
to
And then
be.
when it's not, just move on, you know? But
Yeah,
it's,
yeah. You
yeah,
just,
it is. It's really hard.
man, isn't this life thing called life pretty crazy?
Yeah, it is. I think with the rule thing too, I think it's a lot of things, and I think it's also just distractedness. I think people, well, I think two things. I
Mm.
think being distracted and unhappy is a huge factor. I mean, look, dude, the US scores like the lowest on happiness out of like any country, I think, still. On
Hmm.
top of that, you have, you know, most people are living check to check. They're scrolling on Instagram and social media, looking at all this stuff that they can't afford and seems so far out of reach, looking at all these things that are unattainable. They're miserable.
Plus, they're just lied to all the freaking
Yeah.
time. Like I look at, dude, I look at like the you go in any bookstore, like the one of the biggest sections in any bookstore is the diet section. And like all of them are just lying to people because they're like, eat this, don't eat that. You need to do this, don't do that. And it's like
Yeah.
literally just don't eat too many calories. Like, period. Just do that. It's
Yeah.
simple. You don't need a whole book for it. You don't need a whole recipe. You
Dude,
don't need a whole thing. And it's like you're just being lied to all over
well,
the
and taken
place.
advantage of, dude, because like all
Mhm.
these companies now too, you just see executives getting absurd salaries where everybody else is getting laid off and fired, but they keep getting bonuses and this and that. So I think people are justifiably just pissed off too and just don't see a way forward. And when you're in a corner like that, caring about anything else, dude, is out the window. Like that's why I think people just like drive like jackasses. They're distracted. They don't care. They're trying so hard to
Mhm.
like just get themselves out of
Get through
their
the
own
day.
head. Yeah, and get through the own day. I think they just don't care. And I think it's you see it getting, and I think it's getting worse. Like I think we notice it more now, precisely because the situation is getting worse. And the worse it
Mm,
gets, the more you're going to see of that. Like I
yeah,
remember
that
I
makes
was watching
sense.
a thing where like these people were meeting uh um venture capitalists in San Francisco. They were literally walking over homeless people to get to the building. Like literally walking over them. It's like, dude, that is
In
such
arguably one of the richest cities in the
in the
world.
world. Yeah. And like
Yeah.
the dichotomy between that, you're just like, it's mind blowing. I mean, it's just insane, right? That they're going to ask for not a little bit of money either. Like, and
Yeah.
meanwhile, you have people outside that are like have nothing. Yeah. And I think that's just getting worse and worse too. So
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
it's
I,
hard because I feel for you though too. Because like I try to keep that stuff in mind when I see people do stuff and not get angry, but I still get angry because it's like, at the same time, it's like I also face all those things and I'm still doing these things, you know? It's like,
yeah. I literally I died laughing when I saw that scene in The Big
oh,
Lebowski,
it's
and I
such a good
watched it just
scene.
over and over and over again because I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I'm doing everywhere I go. This is just too much.
He just
Okay.
snaps, totally loses
Yeah.
it.
And then like moments later, he's totally cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because everything's
So
back to
good.
order. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's nuts. I think a lot of people, it's hard, I think it is. But I think, I see it's like I think wanting to be the example is important because it motivates us to be better. But I think people also, like you said, they don't realize that we make the world and it's hard to see that direct connection between my acting a certain way and the world being a certain way because we seem so
Mm,
insignificant too. But
mm.
really, as an individual, yes, but collectively, we're not. Collectively, we literally do make the world. So the more of us that are an example, the better the world becomes. But it's really hard to see when no one's being an example, right? It's really
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we're missing some good examples recently. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's all for this episode. We answered it. Rules don't matter. Just do whatever the heck you want because nobody cares anyways.
Not
So,
anymore. Yeah.
if you enjoyed this episode, like, share, subscribe, check out our other episodes, give us a good review. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.